Hey guys, do you want to create cool borders like this with drop shadow on it? Whoa! Or maybe you're a little crazy guy and you want to add some animations like this. This one zooms in, this one zooms out, and check these ones out. Ooh, we're moving on the left side, we're moving on the right side. Wow, how fun, how convenient. Would you then want to perhaps save these effects as drag and drop presets straight from the edit page onto any footage you want? Well, too bad, because it's really hard and monotonous and stressful, and it took me over 2 years to find a workflow. But I am happy to say that I know how to do it now, and this video is going to document my journey and the steps it takes to get there. It's probably going to be long. You probably don't even need to watch it if you're doing something much more simple. However, there are chapters down below. You can skip around to whatever part of the tutorial you want, and hopefully this will be helpful to you because I spent way too much time on it. An ungodly amount of time on it. So much time, I don't want to ever look at Davinci Resolve again. Unless this video gets 500. All right, let's go ahead and start. So to begin, you are going to need a couple of things. Number one, footage. This is where the border is going to go on top of. The next thing you're going to need is a background. I recommend having it be a color that isn't black because we're going to be adding a drop shadow to our border, and if you have a black background, it's not going to show up. But that's not all. The next thing you're going to need is a zip program. I recommend 7-zip. Go ahead and download it, and once it's installed and ready, we'll get back to it later. The last thing you're going to need is a plugin for Davinci Resolve called Magic Animate V3. This right here is the paid version. It'll make your life a lot easier, but the tutorial that I'm going to show you today just involves the regular free version. If you have the money, please spend it. Mr. Alex Tech is a good guy and deserves your support. I'm just a cheapo though, and I wanted to do it with the free version, so here we are. A link down in the description to Magic Animate V3. Go ahead and download that, install the DRFX file, and with all that being said, we're ready to begin. The first thing you're going to want to do is to click on your footage and go directly to the Fusion page. Yeah, I know. Isn't that fun? Everybody wants to work on their effects in the edit page and mess with all these little fun sliders. If you want these borders and you want to be able to turn them into presets, the entire process from beginning to end happens in Fusion, which means that we're going to need to explain some things. Media in, this first node right here, will always be at the beginning of your node tree, and all it is basically is the media that you're working with. In our case, it's this ocean.png, but you can make media in whatever the heck you want. If you right click on any piece of media, you can open it in the Fusion page, or if you go to Effects, Fusion Composition, and then open that up in Fusion, go to Media Pool, and drag any piece of media, bam, there's your media in node. Pretty simple. Media out is also fairly simple. This is the end of your node tree, the final node you're going to want to add. And all media out is doing is taking all this chaos here and outputting it directly to your timeline. So whatever happens here is what's going to get outputted to here. Notice this was empty before, but now it has our media in and it's outputting it. You don't have to mess with anything to do with the media out node, which is nice. We're only going to need 3 nodes to make this possible. The first one is in the Effects tab, and you're going to want to go and type in Video, go to Open Effects, Video Collage, and be sure that you're adding it directly to this line. You'll notice that it'll be blue if it's working. Cool. Next up, with this node selected, I want you to hover your mouse right over here to this merge option. Click it, and it should have automatically added it directly to our little node line here. Merge is another node that we're not going to be messing with at all. So you see all these settings here? Ignore them. Don't bother touching them. All it's going to do is to take our video collage node and add it to our final one, which, surprise, surprise, is Magic, if I could type, Magic Animate V3 free or the paid version, whichever one you got. Add it to our little node tree here. And now we are ready to make the effect. I'm assuming that if you actually are making it to this part of the video, that you presumably want to have a border for your 16:9 widescreen content. So that's the one I'm going to show you. If you don't need that size and want instead a border for 4:3 content, skip ahead to the next chapter. But for now, I'm going to show you how to do a 16:9 one. All right, so we're going to start here on workflow and go to create tile. Move this down to 1 and this down to 1, and make sure rounding is set to 0.05. Davinci, for whatever reason, likes to add a bunch of these unnecessary options that make me go crazy, but you know, what's the big deal? Don't worry about it. All right, next up, left and right margins. You're going to want to set this to 0.015. This you're just going to want to be at 0. And for horizontal and vertical spacing, this number needs to be 0.075. And just like that, we've created the global settings for this border. I would not mess with any of these settings. You can if you want, if you really hate my design, but trust me, the more artistic interpretation side of this is coming in the next tab over on tiles. So now what we're going to want to do is go to custom size and shape, click on this checkbox, and be sure that this is set to 0.05 and get rid of all the unnecessary junk. Resize content, you can leave this as is. Now on tile styling is where you, the viewer, get to have fun. You can change the border color to whatever you want. I'm going to go with white, but pick whatever color matches your branding. Tile border is going to determine the size. So for me, I like having it at minus 0.03, but if you change it to 2, it'll be a little bit smaller, or if you go to 4, it'll be a little bit bigger. Mess with it to your heart's content. I'm going to keep it at 0.3. Now, if you are intent on just making a border without any animation, then feel free to add your drop shadow settings here. However, because we are going to be doing some animations, Magic Animate V3 has better drop shadow controls once we get to it. So I instead am going to skip this and uncheck drop shadow. Tile animation I am also going to uncheck because again, Magic Animate V3 does a much better job. So now you have your 16:9 widescreen border. Now we're going to make this exact same border, but for 4:3, which means we're going to have to mess with a couple of these settings to get it looking just right. So let's start first on tile 1 globals. Make sure your workflow is set to create tile and go here. Columns and rows should be set to 1. And rounding, instead of 0.05, set it directly to 0. On left and right margins, you're going to want this to say 0.26. Make sure all of these three say 0. And the final two options, horizontal and vertical spacing, you can leave at 0.075. Now, we're going to go over to tiles. Mute tiles you can leave alone. Custom size and shape, you're going to want to click on this checkbox right here and change custom rounding to 0.05. Resize content you can leave alone as is. All of these settings that I've told you, you should not mess with. It'll keep the border looking nice and 4:3. However, for the remaining settings, for the remaining settings, You can mess with them to however you like, make the border look however you want to. At first, we're going to have the option to change the color. So if you want it to be yellow or green or blue, this is where you change it. I'm going to have it on white. Tile border is going to determine the size. So I like mine at minus 0.03. However, if you change it to 2, it'll be a little bit smaller. Or if you go to 4, it'll be a little bit bigger. Just play with this number. Get it looking right. Now, for drop shadow and tile animation, if all you care about is having this border without any of the animation whatsoever, then yeah, feel free, click apply to all tiles and mess with these settings. However, I'm going to add some animation, and it just so happens that Magic Animate V3 does a much better job adding drop shadow controls. So we're going to do that later on. Same for tile animation, just be sure this is unclicked. Magic Animate 3 does a much better job. Speaking of Magic Animate V3, that's the next option, so let's freaking go! Wow, what an epic jump cut that everybody loved and enjoyed. Now we're going to mess with the animation settings. First off, we're going to have settings that should be constant, regardless of whatever animation you're going to do. Then later on, I'm going to tell you exactly what settings you can fiddle with in case you want to try something different. But for the settings that have to stay the same regardless, leave all of this stuff alone. You're going to go to Enable Shadow and click that. And here is where we're able to add our drop shadow. You can configure this to your taste. Just be sure for every one of these borders you make in animations that the drop shadow settings stay consistent. For me, I like having it at 0.4 for drop shadow, 45 for the angle, 0.07 for shadow distance, and for softness, all the way down to 0. This is how I like them, but feel free to change it to whatever you want. All right, now we get to add the animation, and this is going to depend heavily on what you want to do. We have options for zoom, whips, spins, and dissolves. Pick one of these or combine them if you want. You can do that. There's a lot of options here. I'm going to show you how to do a simple up-in animation. So we're going to start at the bottom of the screen. The border in the image is going to come up here and sit in the middle and not move. In order to accomplish that, go to Animation Type, click on Only Ins, and for any movement where it's moving left, right, up, and down, whip control is what you're going to want. I never messed with spin or dissolve. For zoom animations, you should obviously use zoom control, but we're going to go with whip, whip in, and then what you're going to want to do is swap these around. So this should be 0.5 and the Y should be negative 0.5. The last thing you're going to want to do is to go to anim length, and the one that made the most sense to me after fiddling around with it for hours is 0.33. I think whether you're doing a whip, a spin, or a zoom, 0.33 is the length that you should go with regardless. All right, last thing, I lied, there's more. We have easing. This is going to be set to none and this to quad, but you can kind of manage it to taste. I like messing with the animations here rather than on video collage because you actually get these easing curve options, which I think is pretty cool. But with all that being said, we are officially done. So if you go over here to the Edit tab, bring the timeline all the way to the beginning, hit play, look at that. We have a border, we have drop shadow, and a nice little animation where it comes from the bottom of the screen up into frame. And you can tell we did it right because our drop shadow is a different color than our background. How nice, how convenient. This is the end for the first part of the tutorial. If all you wanted to know was how to make a border with animation, you're done. Congrats, you finished it. Good job. However, now is the part of the tutorial where it gets a little bit more complicated because I don't want to make this effect every time that I want to use it. And I'm going to have multiple clips and multiple videos. No, instead, what I and most normal people want is a drag and drop effect on the edit page, similar to one of these, where you can take it, drag it onto your footage, and the effect is automatically applied. How do you do that? Well, you would think you would just right click your footage and save as preset, but oh no, that would be too easy. Instead, the method entirely takes place in the Fusion page. Not again. All right, head over to the Fusion page, and what you're going to want to do is to highlight your 3 nodes: Video Collage, Merge 1, and Magic Animate V3. Do not highlight Media In and Media Out. These are going to change from project to project. These are the settings that stay the same every time. Then you're going to right click on any one of them, go to Macro, and click Create Macro. The first thing you're going to want to do is name your macro. So in my case, we have an up in animation. And because I made a widescreen border, I'm going to call it widescreen. However, if you made a 4x3 border, you can call it full screen or 4x3 or retro or whatever you want. Just be sure you give it an actual name. Now, this is the part that confuses a lot of people because you're bombarded with all of these menus and you're not sure what they do and what you should click on or if you should click on anything. It's way too confusing. But all it is, essentially, is controls for your nodes. So if you look here, you see Magic Animate Website button, Magic Animate Website button, Aspect, Aspect, shutter angle, shutter angle. All of these controls are options for this node. And the export is going to allow us to have those options when we make our little edit page preset. But how do you know which ones to click? Output, you want to have checked. Foreground, you do not want to have checked. Everything else in Magic Animate V3, you're going to want to click. All of these options down here, ignore them. They're useless. Don't bother. They're bad. Merge 1, ignore it. You don't need it. It's not helpful. Video collage, we do need because that's our border settings. Which ones do we click on here? You're going to want source, leave output and effect mask alone, and then from the controls menu, click everything all the way down to the bottom. Thankfully, there's not many options here, but still, you're going to do a lot of this for every preset you want to make. And keep in mind, I didn't show you one animation. I showed you 20. So I'm going to have to do this every time I want to make a preset of individually clicking all of these boxes and probably getting some form of arthritis in the process just because I wanted to do something as simple as making an edit page preset. I don't know why Davinci had to make it complicated and not just give you the option to right click on anything, or why it couldn't have all taken place in the edit page instead of Fusion altogether, but that's the world we live in, unfortunately. And because of that, I'm going to be doing a lot of clicking. In fact, I'm not going to make you watch all this. You know, you don't need to. Basically, click every control option in Video Collage 1 and click every control option in Magic Animate V3, including the mids and including the mask. And when you got that done, then you're going to want to watch the rest of the tutorial. But for you guys here, I'm going to cut to that point. So I'll see you in a bit. Okay, I'm finally done. Geez, that took 2 minutes. All right, so when you're done clicking on all of these boxes, except for these 3, you don't actually need to, you want to go to File, and you're going to get 2 options, Save As and Save As Group. Save As is going to make this entire thing one single node with no options. Save As Group, meanwhile, is going to give you access to all 3 nodes and all the different settings. This doesn't affect the edit page. This is strictly for editing these settings in Fusion. However, I like the extra control, so we're going to go with Save As Group. Click on that, go to Desktop, and hit Save. All right. Now, believe it or not, the next step in the process does not involve Davinci Resolve whatsoever. No, instead, now we're going to be on the Windows desktop. Because of course we are. Because of course we are. Now, what you're going to want to do is create a folder. And this folder should be called Edit. Then you're going to want to open that folder and make another folder. This one should be called effects. Then you're going to want to open up that folder and create another new folder. This one, however, can be named whatever you want because it's strictly for organizational purposes. If you have a bunch of drag and drop effects like I do, you'll notice that they're usually listed by the person who made them, and that's helpful for finding your effects for later. But since we're making these effects, you have to actually go out of your way and make the folder to help Davinci organize them properly. So for me, I'm going to call this Blue Couch Effects because my YouTube channel is called Blue Couch Productions and you should subscribe, but you can call it whatever you want. You want to open that folder up and drag your .setting file that you just created and put it into that folder. Cool. We done? No, not yet. Remember when I told you at the very beginning of this tutorial to download 7-zip? Well, this is where we're going to need it for. Right click on that folder and you're going to get on Windows 11 a compress to zip file option. Click that. Then you're going to want to click on properties and you're going to want to change this entire thing. So instead of edit, call it whatever your .setting file was. So in my case, up in widescreen, then you're going to want to put a period. And instead of having it be called .zip, you're instead going to want to call it DRFX and hit OK. You're going to get this warning that it might become unusable, but they're wrong. So just click yes. And bam, our folder now magically transformed into a Davinci Resolve effects file. And what can you do with that? Well, if you double click it, it'll open back up Resolve and it'll give you the option to install your effect to the effect library on the edit page. You're going to want to click install. Give it a minute to refresh. If it doesn't show up, you might have to restart Resolve. But we're going to go to the edit page and test out our effect. So I'm going to make our background a little bit longer. We're going to grab ocean.png with nothing on it, no effects whatsoever. Then in the effects tab, scroll down. And would you look at that? Our folder, Blue Couch Effects, and our preset show up. And then if you drag that preset onto the footage, would you look at that? Now there's a border. And if you go to the beginning, it does the animation. And the reason that we spent all that time clicking all of those boxes is that you still have all the options you want to change it. Now, it's not going to look as nice as it did in the Fusion page. It kind of just combines all of these menus, but trust me, all of the options still work perfectly well. At the start is going to be the video collage settings, and that's going to be the case right up until this first line. Then these are the Magic Animate settings until you scroll all the way to the bottom there. Then if you go back up to the top, mids is from Magic Animate and mask is also from Magic Animate. Settings doesn't do anything. But let's say, right, that we wanted to change our border color to yellow. Well, look at that. You can do it. What if you wanted to change the size of it? You can do that too. What if you wanted to change the animation or the drop shadow? So we can mess with the drop shadow angle and the distance and make it look really bad. But then you could also get rid of this whip in animation and replace it with a spin in animation. The only thing I would recommend you change is to go back down to anim length and change it to 0.33 to match how long our other animation was. If we go to the start, hit play, bam, we got a new animation with a yellow border and a drop shadow. But if we don't like how any of this looks and we want to go back to how it used to be, you hit this little trash can and you apply your effect there. And there you go. That's how you make a border with drop shadows and animations and then save that as a preset that you can use on the edit page. I'm sorry it took so long, but now hopefully you understand the process and everything that goes into it. And maybe you can make your own cool effects without having to ever deal with the Fusion page ever again. Or that's what I would say if this was the only effect I ever made. But this was the one that we made, and these are the rest of them. I'm going to get arthritis.